Hello, I'm Officer Stevens, your school resource officer at Apollo Ridge School District. Today I'm reading Mr. Popper's Penguin, page 21, chapter 4, Captain Cook. Call who? Captain Cook asked Mrs. Popper, who had to come in so quietly that none of them heard her. Why the Penguin? Said Mr. Popper. I was just saying, he went on as Mrs. Popper sat down and suddenly on the floor to recover her surprise that we named him after Captain Cook. He was a famous English explorer who lived about the time of the American Revolution. He sailed all over where no one had ever sailed before. He didn't exactly get to the South Pole, of course, but he made a lot of important scientific discoveries about the Arctic regions. He was a brave man and kind leader. So I think Captain Cook would be a very suitable name for our penguin here. Well, I never, said Mrs. Popper. Gork, said Captain Cook, suddenly getting lively again. With a flap of his flippers, he jumped from the tub to the wash stand and stood there for a minute, surveying the floor. Then he jumped down, walked over to Mrs. Popper, and began to peck at her ankle. Stop him, Papa, screamed Mrs. Popper, retreating into the hallway with Captain Cook after her and Mr. Popper and the children following. In the living room, she paused. So did Captain Cook, for he was delighted with the room. Now, a penguin may not look very strange in the living room, but a living room looks very strange to a penguin. Even Mrs. Popper had to smile as they watched Captain Cook with the light of curiosity in his excited circular eyes and his black tailcoat dragging pompously behind the little pinkish feet, strut from one upholstered chair to another, pecking at each to see what it was made of. Then he turned suddenly and marched out to the kitchen. Maybe he's hungry, said Janie. Captain Cook immediately marched up to the refrigerator. Gork, he inquired, turned to his slant his head wisely as Mrs. Popper and looking at her pleadingly with his right eye. He certainly is cute, she said. I guess I'll have to forgive him for biting my ankle. He probably only did it out of curiosity anyways. He's a nice, clean-looking bird. Ork, repeated the penguin, nibbling at the metal handle of the refrigerator door with his unstretched beak. Mr. Popper opened the door for him, and Captain Cook stood very high and leaned his sleek black head back so he could see inside. Now that Mr. Popper's work was over for the winter, the icebox was not quite as full as usual. But the penguin did not know that. What do you suppose he likes to eat? Said Mrs. Popper. Let's see, said Mr. Popper, as he removed all the food and sat it on the kitchen table. Now then, Captain Cook, take a look. The penguin jumped up onto the chair and from there onto the edge of the table, flapping his flippers again and recovering his balance. Then he walked solemnly around the table, began and between the dishes of food, inspected everything with the greatest interest, though he touched nothing. Finally he stood very erect, raised his beak to the point of the seal, and made a loud and purring sound. Roar! He thrilled. That's a penguin's way of saying how he's pleased, said Mr. Popper, who had read about it in the Arctic books. Apparently, however, what Captain Cook wanted to show was that he was pleased with their kindness, rather than with food. For now, to their surprise, he jumped down and walked to the diner room. I know, said Mr. Popper. We ought to have some seafood for him, canned shrimp or something. Or maybe he isn't hungry yet. I've read that penguins can go months without food. Mama, Papa, called Bill. Come see what Captain Hook has done. Captain Hook had done it already. He had discovered the bowl of goldfish on the dining room windowsill. By the time Mrs. Popper reached over to lift him away, he had already swallowed at least the last of the goldfish. Bad, bad, penguin. Mrs. Popper glared down at Captain Hook. Captain Hook squatted He knows he has done wrong, said Mr. Popper. Isn't he smart? Maybe we can train him, said Mrs. Popper. Bad, naughty captain, she said it to the penguin in a loud voice. Bad to eat the goldfish. And she spanked him on his round black head. Before she can do that again, Captain Hook hastily waddled to the kitchen. There the Poppers found him hiding in the still opened refrigerator. He was squatting under the ice cube coils, under which he could barely squeeze sitting down. His round, white circled eyes looked at them mysteriously from the dimness of the inside of the box. I think that's about the right temperature for him at that, said Mr. Popper. We could let him sleep there at night. But where would I put the food? Asked Mrs. Popper. Oh, I guess we can get another ice box for the food, said Mr. Popper. Look, said Janie, he has gone to sleep. Mr. Popper turned the cold control switch to its coldest so that Captain Cook could sleep more comfortably. Then he left the door ajar so the penguin would have plenty of fresh air to breathe. Tomorrow I will have the icebox service department send a man out to bore some holes in the door for air, he said. And then he can put a handle on the inside of the door so Captain Cook can go in and out of the refrigerator as he pleases. Well, dear me, I never thought we would have a penguin for a pet, said Mrs. Popper. Still, he behaves pretty well on the whole, and he is nice and clean, and perhaps he will be a good example to you and the children. And now I declare we must get busy. We haven't done anything but watch that bird, Papa. Will you just help me to set the beans on the table, please? Just a minute, answered Mr. Popper. I just happen to think that Captain Hook will not feel right on the floor of that icebox. Penguins make their nest of pebbles and stone, so I will just have to get some ice cubes out of the tray and put them under him. That way he will be more comfortable. So that's chapter 4 of Mr. Popper's Penguin.